Welcome to Bedcrime Stories Podcast. I'm your host, T. Hope you guys are all doing great. It's been 3 weeks since Kaylee Goncalves, Maddie Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin lost their lives in a brutal attack at an off-campus rental home in Moscow, Idaho. And still no suspects have been named, and no one's been arrested or charged. In an update released today, Monday, December 5th, 2022, the Moscow, Idaho Police Department confirmed there was an incident at a local business that involved the person Kaylee Goncalves may have told her friends and family about 1 month before she lost her life. This would be the guy who Kaylee felt followed her at one point. The police said that they looked into the theory that Kaylee had someone following her around and watching her. Here's what they disclosed. In mid-October, 2 males appeared to follow Kaylee inside a local Moscow business and then followed her out to her car. However, they made no contact with her. After speaking to those 2 guys, the police determined it is an isolated incident and said there's no evidence indicating that these 2 guys were involved in this crime. Police's update today also mentioned Kaylee's dog, Murphy. Per the investigators, no evidence was found on Murphy, and they stated that Murphy was located in a room where none of the victims were. Murphy showed no signs of having been in any of the crime scene areas, and by that, I think law enforcement means that the dog did not show signs of having entered into Xana's bedroom or Maddie's bedroom. And to go one step farther, I'm assuming this means also that Murphy had no blood on him when he was found around noon on Sunday. It was while searching the home that Sunday morning that the police discovered Murphy in a separate room. They have not said which room that was. My guess would be Kaylee's room, only because Murphy probably followed her around and was probably always by her side, so her room would be the closest one to Maddie's room. Maybe Murphy was with Kaylee when the suspect entered Maddie's room, and then the suspect moved Murphy to Kaylee's room before he began using that sharp-edged object. Murphy being in a separate room tells me that whoever committed the crime is the person who put Murphy in that room. That would be a smart move if he wanted to avoid having the dog attempt to save his mistress, or if he wanted to keep the dog from becoming agitated. This offender must either like dogs or he likes that dog. Note that Murphy is now safely home with Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, Jack D. I also want to make it clear in this video that the police have stated that the perpetrator entered the girl's home either from the sliding doors or the back window of the residence. Those doors and that window at the back of the home open into the kitchen, which is on the 2nd floor of the 3-floor home. So now we don't have to speculate about how the perpetrator got into the home. Note that a handprint was found on the glass of that back sliding door, but of course we don't know who that handprint belongs to. Kaylee's father, Steve Goncalves, has said that Kaylee's injuries were more extensive than those suffered by the other 3 victims. This seems to point to the perpetrator targeting Kaylee. I suspect the perp stumbled upon Ethan Chapin and Zana Kernodle somehow and felt he had to silence them. Maybe they opened Xana's door after hearing some noise, saw the suspect and said, "What are you doing in here?" The perpetrator, who was already enraged, probably bulldozed his way over to Xana's door, pushed Ethan in, and used his sharp-edged object on both students. Or it could have been done in the opposite order. He could have gone upstairs, done the deed, come down, Ethan maybe opened the door, and then he went into that room and attacked those two people. The suspect did ultimately go upstairs, where he encountered yet another surprise: Kaylee in Maddie's room with Maddie. Thus, he perhaps felt he had to harm Maddie along with Kaylee. So although there are 4 victims in this case, it's possible the suspect really only intended to harm one person. By the way, one former detective who appeared on court TV said he felt the perpetrator may have had someone with him helping him restrain one victim as he attacked the other. So someone to hold maybe Xana down or Ethan down as he harmed the other person, and the same situation in the room with Kaylee and Maddie. He's the only former detective that I've heard mention the possibility of 2 perpetrators in this sense, with one holding one victim down. Kaylee's father, determined to find answers to track down the suspect, has now hired private investigators. Steve Goncalves told the New York Post that he and his wife Christy were horrified to learn some of the detectives were in their mid-20s. Goncalves said, and I quote, "They're just inexperienced, and I don't want anyone making mistakes on my child's case," end quote. I know some of us are worried that maybe Mr. Goncalves is hurting the investigation, but I have to give him props because he has seen the police and the prosecutor make contradictory statements regarding whether this was a targeted attack. Mr. Goncalves also watched as the girls' vehicles sat in front of the house in the elements over the past 2.5 weeks. We've heard some former detectives say that if they were working the case, they would have grabbed those vehicles and taken them to a location that was secure where they could be analyzed for evidence. I also heard on a channel called Newsmax, one guest said that he finds Kaylee's father suspicious. He finds the details that Steve Goncalves is sharing with the public, details that only the suspect would know. So I don't know, I'm finding that a little out there. I'm pretty sure Kaylee's father did not have anything to do with this crime. So is Mr. Goncalves talking out of turn? Did the police tell him all these details and he's just decided to share them with the public? Or is Steve Goncalves coming to these conclusions through his own thought process? We won't know for certain until the police confirm or deny all these details. Over on CNN, John Miller, CNN's chief law enforcement analyst and former deputy commissioner of intelligence and counterterrorism for the New York Police Department, that was a mouthful, said the following about the police's reluctance to say too much, and I quote, "What the police have been reluctant to do in this case is to say they have a suspect, even though they have had suspects who have risen and fallen in various levels of importance because of the nature of the beast. Police having no suspects is factually incorrect. Police have had a number of suspects they've looked at, but they have no suspect they're willing to name. You don't name them unless you have a purpose for that. That's not unusual," end quote. So that's another confirmation that no one is truly cleared and that the police sometimes say people are cleared even when they secretly have someone on their list of persons of interest. Miller also explained the role that the FBI is playing in the investigation. One, the first involves its behavior science unit, which is a valuable resource for cases with an unknown offender because it narrows the scope of the offender's characteristics. So I'm guessing these people from the FBI are criminal profilers, and they're letting the Moscow detectives know what type of person to look for. The second role the FBI is playing is through its advanced technology, such as its combined DNA indexing system. This allows law enforcement officials and crime labs to share and search through thousands of DNA profiles. And the third role is in the FBI's 56 field offices in major cities throughout the United States. This will help the investigation expand its reach and capabilities. On to the DNA left at the scene of the crime. Most experts believe the chances are pretty high that the suspect cut himself during the attack. So the police are carefully analyzing the blood evidence right now. What is likely slowing them down is that in this case, with several victims' DNA commingled, and then the suspect's potential DNA also in that mix, it can be problematic trying to separate those people's DNA. And now we're hearing rumors that Jack S., the hoodie guy at the food truck, may be with his parents, who have been confirmed to be in Africa. One detective on Court TV said the police should get a search warrant and go into Jack S.'s apartment and look for evidence and take something that would have his DNA on it. I would think at this point the cops should do this and take this advice, if only to rule Jack S. out, if they can. On to the timeline. We know there are gaps in the timeline for Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin. The police are now asking for any information about where Ethan and Xana were that night. The cops are basically saying, please come forward. There's a concern that students are hesitant to come forward because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble, maybe for doing activities that would be frowned upon. I hope they put their fears aside out of love for their fellow students and love for doing the right thing. Even if they belong to these fraternities and sororities, if they know something that could help solve this case, they owe it to their friends to come forward with that information. Then I listened to a former FBI profiler who told News Nation that we shouldn't overinterpret the latest details about Kaylee Goncalves being the suspect's main target. The profiler said that he's seen cases where the victim with the most violent injuries was not the primary target, but rather the one person who put up the most resistance. The profiler echoed what others have said about the suspect's choice of a sharp-edged object. He said it shows a lot of rage, it was up close and personal. Ashley Banfield also interviewed Bill Cannon of Police Off the Cuff, who said that despite the Moscow police saying that certain people have been cleared, no one is ever cleared until there's an arrest or until the investigation is closed. The talk then shifted to Jack S. He seems to be the person everyone is talking about today, including me. Guy in the hoodie at the grub truck who said he was there, at least supposedly he said that to Joe Vito, to make sure Kaylee and Maddie got home safely. Retired New York City detective Phil Grimaldi weighed in on what the Moscow police would have to do to truly establish Jack S.'s alibi. Jack S. apparently claimed that he drove 5 hours on the night of the crime to get to his parents' cabin. Grimaldi was saying that the cops need to see if Jack's phone shows him traveling for 5 hours in that direction. Grimaldi also stated that just because a person shares a certain story doesn't mean that the cops are really buying it behind the scenes. I hope the young detectives with the Moscow Police Department hear this interview. It sounds like they could learn so much from these seasoned former detectives. Grimaldi said if he was working the case, he'd want to talk to whoever Jack S. said he was with to see if they can corroborate his story and the time that Jack S. said he was with them. Then Bill Cannon said the police should have requested DNA samples from all the people they've interviewed, just in case. And I guess the people that the police would have to talk to establish Jack's alibi would be his parents, who are in Africa, maybe with him. Moving on to the topic of that particular fixed blade sharp object the suspect is believed to have used on all 4 victims. Larry Kobylinski, a forensic dentist who teaches at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, appeared on News Nation with Chris Cuomo, and he brought up the autopsy reports. These have not been released, but when they are, Kobylinski says they will describe each and every wound that was made by that sharp-edged object, and from that information the investigators will know if the object used to harm the students was serrated or straight-edged. They will even know the width of the BLADE, if it is 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. Per Kobylinski, the one thing they won't be able to determine is the object's length, and that's because it can go different distances into the body. It's rather disturbing to think about this stuff, and it underscores how hard it will be for the families if this ever goes to trial. Those photos will be shared, and those wounds will be discussed in detail. Yet another former detective, Chris Anderson, appeared on Ashley Banfield's show, and he said we should not be too dismayed by that 100 or so pieces of evidence. He didn't seem to be too concerned about it. Ashley and Chris also discussed the complex crime scene, which, Ashley pointed out, includes the 2 bedrooms where the victims were found, the home's 3 floors, the entrance and exit point, the staircase, and the 6 vehicles that were in the front parking area. It will also include the outside of the house where the suspect may have left footprints, the corner club bar, the food truck, the car the girls were driven home in, the fraternity house where Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin attended a party on Saturday night. Wow, that's a lot. I didn't realize those are all considered potential parts of the crime scene. Ashley then mentioned that the cars have been driven to a public lot where they're currently sitting in the elements, meaning in the snow and in the cold. The detective explained that if the police did not find anything in those vehicles and want to release them to the families, then it's okay for them to be in that public parking lot. But if those vehicles still need to be analyzed, then they should be inside a secure facility. It's probably things like this and those confusing statements by the police and the prosecutor that continue to drive Kaylee's father to want to do his own investigating and hire his own investigators. That's all for now, my friends. Who knows what tomorrow will bring in this crazy, awful case. Stay safe, sleep well, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories, do me a favor, smash that like button.